Welcome to Terror in Tandem.
Just speed this up in post.
Welcome to Terror in Tandem, a podcast about finding entertainment in the macabre, hosted by the knowledgeable and lovable Laura and Richard Mathiasen. Each episode we discuss the horror genre, from books to film to TV and beyond, sometimes even from the beyond. You can find us online at terrorintandem.com and on Instagram at terrorintandem.
Hello.
Hello. What are
Hey.
What are you doing right now?
Just speaking into a microphone.
Oh, well, I can't see you. You're at one of our, West Coast luxury properties.
We're in separate luxury properties today?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's why I'm not there with you.
That's true. And I know that because we talked about this. This was all planned.
Yeah, we talk all the time. We talk nonstop. Wow.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of our very popular recurring segment that people can't get enough about. It's trending constantly.
Where are we? Where
Remake.
In the world is Richard and Laura Mathiasen?
Oh, that's for those of you of a very particular age.
Any age.
Yeah, an awesome age. Welcome to
An
another
ice age.
edition of Make Remake. This time,
Oh, we're just jumping right into it?
This
isn't a free-flowing episode.
Oh, right.
Yeah, you're right.
Banter.
No, actually, you're right. No, it's fine. We're jumping right into it because this is going to be a Make Remake episode.
It's going to be a discussion.
Listen, let me... hold on, co-host.
Okay.
I will regain focus of this episode.
Holding on.
Hi, everyone. We are going to be talking about the 1956 version and the 1978 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers in another of our wonderful... recurring episodes, Make Remake.
Yeah. Now, before we do that, let's just quickly mention that this movie has been remade a total of 4 times.
And is in the works to be made a 5th.
Probably. Yeah, that makes sense. Just briefly mention 1993's Body Snatchers, which was directed by Abel Ferreira. Starring a young Gabrielle Anwar. It's very, very good. I do recommend watching that one. I don't recommend watching the 2007 The Invasion, directed by Oliver Hirschbiegel, who directed the very excellent Das
Starring
Experiment.
Nicole Kidman
yeah,
and
Nicole
Daniel
Kidman
Craig.
and Daniel Craig were in it. Now, Das Experiment was a really good movie, but this one got chopped up by the studios, and it's a real mess, and it bombed, and it deserved to, and it's unfortunate. But we're going to be diving into the first 2 adaptations of what was originally a novel.
Yeah, so Invasion of the Body Snatchers was originally a book written by Jack Finney in 1954 called Body Snatchers, and it was serialized in Collier's magazine.
Yeah, a lot of stories at that time. There was a sort of, this was really popularized in the Victorian era. Charles Dickens and whatnot, publishing their stories in magazines, in serials, in chapter form. This really had a resurgence in the, from the 1920s through, I'd say, the 1960s.
Yeah, it had a real Captain's Crunch.
Yeah, exactly.
A serial version.
So
Get it?
I do.
Do you? I don't
do.
feel like I got good
No,
enough laugh.
it penetrated.
Oh,
It hurt.
So the 1956 film, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, was directed by Don Siegel, written by Daniel Mainwaring, starring Kevin McCarthy, Dana Winter, Larry Gates, Carolyn Jones, who played Morticia Addams in the original version of The Addams Family.
Yes, she did. Yeah, it's got quite a cast, actually.
You would not know that she played Morticia Addams. It's
oh no, she's quite unrecognizable.
Yeah.
It's a definite appreciation for the makeup they did on the Addams Family. So Don Siegel's
or
probably,
like what hair can do. How hair can change
for sure.
somebody so drastically.
So Don Siegel's probably best known for directing, thrillers and westerns. He was a frequent collaborator with Clint Eastwood. Famously directed Dirty Harry, but early on, he was known as like a very reliable B movie director. He did, kind of low budget crime thrillers and whatever was popular at the time. And in the 50s, outer space shit, very popular. We're talking the dawn of the space race, Sputnik, and the Mercury program and whatnot. So space is all the rage. And whenever, something is popularized, horror likes to jump in and remind us why you should all be afraid of it.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because I'm going to go into some of the allegory and themes of the actual movie of both the 56 and 78 version.
Oh, absolutely.
I want to give a brief synopsis for those of you who may not know or have watched the film.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Miles, played by Kevin McCarthy, returns to the small town California medical practice in Santa Mira.
Let's just say that this is an actor, not the politician.
Right. He discovers that his patients are suffering from some kind of paranoid delusion, and that stating that, he doesn't recognize his relatives and his friends are all acting strange. And although Dr. Miles takes a little convincing, once he is convinced and after he reconnects with his old sweetheart, Becky, played by Dana Winter.
The lovely Dana
Winter.
Winter.
She's so gorgeous. The whole movie, I was like, God, she's
pretty
so
much
beautiful.
Every scene in the movie, she's wearing a dress with gloves
so pretty.
on. She's like, just always.
Even when she's running.
I'm just saying it's very
it's
very 1950s, this movie. And like, she's always dressed and made up.
Once they start to reestablish their relationship, they mutually discover the paranoia is real.
Yeah, they so they're friends. Well, do you want to talk about the pod people and the pods?
Yeah, I was getting to that.
I jumped in, didn't I?
Yep.
Okay.
So
jumping out.
Aliens, known as pod people, invade this small town by creating emotionless duplicates of their human inhabitants. And these emotional duplicates act uniformly and form a deeply entrenched community, which contrasts the American ideals of freedom of expression and individuality that was starting to emerge.
Well, before we get into some of the themes, which one of the things that really fascinates me about both versions of these movies, and I love both versions of these movies, I do have a favorite, but they're both great, is they both address two very different societal fears that were unique to the decades in which they were created. So the 50s version has its own message. The 70s version has its own message, but they both follow the same basic plot line, which is this race of beings, this plant-based race. They're not blood and meat like humans. They traverse the stars. Now, in the 50s version, they traverse the stars in seed pods that ride solar winds, and that's actually the same thing as the novel. They land on Earth, and inside the pods grow perfect doppelgangers of a person they're going to replace. And while the pod is placed near a person, and while that person sleeps, there's a psychic transfer. Then they dispose of the body, and the doppelganger takes over. And the only real way to tell the difference is the doppelganger has all of the memories and experience, but none of the emotion, because they don't feel. They don't have emotion.
Well, what's really striking is that you can remake this movie and have it adapt to any societal or political fears that are taking place, which is what I think is one of the more unique aspects of both of these movies.
Yes.
Because the 1956 version, even though this has been denied by the author of the book, it has been believed to be a statement against McCarthyism and communism, and bringing into elements of like the Cold War and the Red Scare, more along the lines of the enemy is hiding in plain sight.
Well, let's talk about the book for a second, because the book has a bit of a different message itself. Now, the ending of the book is the most optimistic of any adaptation of any version of this. At the end of the book, and I'm sorry to spoil a 60-year book that none of you are going to read anyway, mankind wins. Like, we unequivocally win. The aliens are forced to leave. Those that are left behind are hunted down to extinction. Now, the reason the aliens are here in the first place is they come from a dying planet, blah, blah, blah. But when they're sort of confronted of, like, why are you doing this? Their answer is basically like, we're going to take better care of your planet than you are. Look at you. You're polluting this place. You fight with each other. You're blowing each other up. We're talking about the dawn of the atomic age, and the first nuclear bomb was only dropped 10 years prior. So the whole idea was, the aliens are like, mankind can't be trusted with Earth. But you can tell it's pretty heavily influenced. If anyone's ever read Robert A. Heinlein's The Puppet Masters, which, by the way, speaking of Donald Sutherland, star of the 1978 version, he was in The Puppet Master, the 90s movie. So he's been in a couple of movies about mind-controlling aliens. But like you said, the 50s version, it's definitely that loss of what is considered to be an exceptional American quality of individualism, rugged individualism. We're all our own man. We're all our own person. Nobody tells us what to do. And the worst possible thing that could ever happen to us is working together towards a common goal. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, this film was essentially an extension of, like, really great radio shows like Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, and people listened to the stories on the radio because they were more receptive to that information. And so this is sort of like that penetration of the community is all, the whole phrase pod person came out of this film.
God, it's such a part of the zeitgeist. Yeah, absolutely.
But essentially in the film, the psychiatrist character played by Larry Gates, Danny.
Yeah.
He, now, when he was a pod person, tells, Dr. Miles that the seeds were drifting through space for years and then took root in a farmer's field. And then from those seeds came the pods that now have the power to reproduce themselves in the exact likeness of any form of life, in any form of life.
Yes. Yeah.
They don't really explore that in the 1956 film, but they do sort of touch on that a little bit in the 1978 one, which I want to talk about, that banjo dog.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that for sure. Holy fuck. But we, the thing about the 50s version, before I get into some of my issues with the 50s version, I do want to celebrate some of the virtues of it, which the performances are fantastic. Yep. Kevin McCarthy especially.
It's in black and white.
Yeah,
we should notate that.
It is. It's well filmed. It's a tight, it's a Don Siegel film, so it's well shot. It is tense, and the special effects of the pod people for the time, pretty damn good.
Yeah, because honestly, there isn't a lot of visual representation of this takeover.
Yeah.
It all seems to happen. It is only represented when they see the actual pods and the pod people and themselves, their likenesses within the pods. And that was, pretty like a small part of the film. Otherwise, you don't see any of it.
No, see, and now we're going to get into my issues. And honestly, my issues with this film are the issues I have with a lot of films made during my least favorite decade of American filmmaking, which is the 1950s. It's just so sanitary. Everything is like very clean. Even the psychic transfer just happens while you're sleeping, and it's not really explained.
I'll tell you why that I think that it's really important to see it, to not see it, because it's happening. It can happen to anybody, and it happens while you sleep. So that fear of not falling asleep, something that you must do at some point.
Yeah.
And this overtaking happens without your knowledge, and it's not painful. Everybody's like, oh, it's not painful at all. I feel wonderful.
It does happen in the 50s version. I think one of the real virtues of the movie is that it starts happening so slowly and so in the background with these throwaway comments that it really, I mean, we know what to expect. So when you hear someone in the background mention that their husband is acting strangely, we as the audience understand. But the way that Don Siegel methodically peppers out this information, you do get the sense that the noose is already around your neck before you've realized that someone's been putting it there.
Well, Dr. Miles, he is the villain, according to everyone else in the film, because
it has that I am
has
legend.
all those. He has all those delusions and hysteria, and he is accusing all of the friends and family in his community as being like an alien, and there are less and less people who believe his side of the story, even though he's like shouting from the rooftops.
Well, yeah, there's that amazing and probably one of the more famous scenes of this movie when Kevin McCarthy runs onto the highway, which never a good idea in Southern California. And he's pounding on car windows, screaming and raving. You gotta listen to me. They're everywhere. They look like us. And every word out of his mouth is true. But no one's listening to him because why would you? I mean, this is a random guy in the street hitting your car on the highway and screaming about aliens. Now,
that's the sort of advantage we have as viewers of this film. We also know the truth.
Yes.
And so we do not vilify him.
But if they ended the movie right there, I would have been happy. See, then there's like that next scene where he goes to literally the next town over, tells one person about what's going on, and they're like, fuck, call the army, call the FBI, and America wins. And the movie kind of ends on that note of, whew.
Well, it ends with you thinking it ends on that note.
It definitely seems to suggest that America wins, that like mankind.
Sure, but I want to, when we get to the 1978, I want to talk about how that could be argued that that is actually not the truth.
I understand, but I think at the time, there was certainly pressure to end most movies on a happy ending, or at least one with a promise of optimism.
Well, I see the promise of hope, but I do not see it executed as such.
Yeah.
So I don't agree. Audience, you could probably pick up on the fact that we do not agree on which our favorite versions are.
Which blows my mind.
Some of us
honestly.
shouldn't skew their commentary.
I think we can have our own opinions.
Yeah,
Thank you.
We can.
Audience, I'm sorry you have to witness
the facts
this.
of the movie. I do want to tell you a couple of facts from filming the 1956 version.
I have facts.
The actors had to have naked impressions of themselves made in order for the pod to reveal their likeness. And in order to do this, they had to be submerged in hot casting material with only a straw in their mouths to breathe through for hours and hours and hours.
Imagine that on your bits and pieces.
Yeah. And then the film required Kevin McCarthy to run for days, for like literal days.
Yeah. Yeah. In a suit with
in California
with
work
like
dress shoes.
Yeah.
Well, there were no athletic sneakers
I'm just
then anyway.
I'm sure there were sneakers,
not
but like
that we think
tennis
of today.
shoes.
Right. Those don't support you.
I'm just saying, man, that probably hurt like a bastard.
Oh yeah, he's probably so exhausted. And the other piece that I wanted to talk about just briefly is that the term pod person became part of the daily lexicon, and it was really referring to someone who is like a soulless conformist.
Yeah, because that's the commonality between the quote unquote pod people is they just have a flat affectation. They're like Spock kind of, they're we'll get to that. But
so when you're conforming to an idea that people are saying that's not the real, or that's not true, or that you're a pod person, or you're being brainwashed or something, this is sort of what Dr. Miles was shouting against.
Yes.
But the entire community kept like becoming a pod person. So
and
now
here's where we get to the allegory with communism versus capitalism being like, well, you will have unity and harmony. You can work together and solve problems and you'll have peace, but you won't have love or joy. You won't have sadness or grief, but
Yeah.
you won't have excitement or anything good. And what's the trade-off for you? Is this world of chaos and passion worth the freedom of choice, or is it preferable to be, quote unquote, freed from that chaos, but lose any sense of self?
Which
this
is
especially
why
it's a really popular theme of the time. Definitely.
Yeah, I really was drawn to this film in the psychology of, because it played into, first of all, it plays into one of, my most frustrating and enjoyable horror tropes, which is when someone's telling you there's something wrong and then most people are not believing you.
Sure.
Not being believed is so frustrating for characters in horror movies, but also as viewers of characters in horror movies, because we see the truth and we can't convince anybody. Not even this person can convince anybody.
And that's the thing. This movie, when you're telling unaffected people about the pod people, they just think you're crazy. When you're telling pod people about the pod people, they're trying to capture you.
You need to get some sleep.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. That's the solution. Whoa, you just need to rest.
Yeah, and that's the cool part about the movie is scenes where they call the operator, and the operator already knows who he is and is like, why don't you just take a moment, Mr. So-and-so,
And then you get into sort of the moral implications of, well, is it so bad to just go to sleep?
Here's the thing.
Is it so bad to become a pod person because you don't feel any pain?
What is our responsibility? If we all become pod people, we will save the earth. We'll stop climate change. We'll stop war. We'll stop all of these internecine conflicts.
But we'll also stop loving each other.
But we'll stop being human.
Yeah.
We'll stop being human beings. Mm-hmm. We will have what makes us who we are. Is it experience and memory, or is it the
procreation and connection?
Is it the soul? Is it this unquantifiable quality that can't be replicated? Because that's the thing the pod people can't copy. They can copy our memories, our appearance, and our voices perfectly, but they can't copy our emotion.
Well, I guess the great question would be for someone who lived in the 50s to answer this question. What is scarier about this film is becoming a pod person or not being believed that everybody's a pod person.
Yeah.
Because I think in the 1950s, and I did not live then, so I could be wrong, but from what I've heard of it, and people that have lived in there have told us.
Oh, do people from the 50s like to talk about the 50s? Is that been your experience?
Idealistic, and that is the ultimate fear, is having you take away that idealism and the best time of their lives.
I mean, it's ironic
but now,
to talk this way.
Living in 2023 and thinking a world without pain.
Yeah. Without war and climate change.
Yeah. Yes. I don't want to become a pod person.
No.
In a non alien invasion sort of way. And jury's out on whether I do an alien invasion.
Honestly, the more interesting adaptations of the story are ones where that question is not so easily answered.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree.
So
completely.
It's having this distance in the world we live in and looking back to that choice, but also I'd love to know from the 1950s folks, what were you afraid of that? And are you still afraid of that?
I do want to point out, of course, the absolute ridiculousness of a movie this concerned about individual freedom and rights that is pre-civil rights movement and pre-women's rights movement. So obviously this is a movie that is concerned about the individuality and freedom of a very narrow and particular kind of person, and we should keep that in mind.
I did appreciate the fact that the person not being believed is a man.
Also a well-respected and noted
a pillar of the community.
Yeah, he's referred to as that, I think.
Because that's a critical parallel to draw. Because I'm telling you, if you identify with that character at all and his struggle to be believed, that will give you a little insight on what it's like for women when they speak out about something when they're not believed. and not just women, but men. I'm a woman, so I'm talking from the perspective of a female to, you know, the audience, about if you identify at all with that struggle or fear of not being believed when you know the truth, and even to the point of where you question your own truth.
Well, that's your version of things, and I don't believe a word of it. So you mentioned earlier Carolyn Jones, who later went to play Morticia Addams.
Yes.
Her husband in the film was played by a guy named King Donovan, who was married to Imogene Coca.
Oh, wow.
Passed away, still married to her. Imogene Coca, obviously, you know, probably known to people of our generation for her memorable turn in Vacation.
Yeah, right.
You know,
yeah,
that was pretty awesome. But yeah, just a little trivia about King Donovan.
Well, I just want to say that yes, the 1956 version is more simplistic in its cinematic approach,
and in its morality.
Yep, but I did find it to be truly frightening.
It's an effective movie.
Yes,
yeah,
it's effective in its less is more with that movie.
And it's a movie about.
It's definitely a classic.
If you there are many ways to interpret it. There's certainly the political angle. There's there's a social angle. There's a, like I went into very briefly. There could be a possible racial angle, but the thing about this movie, at its core, it's a cosmic horror film. Mm-hmm. It's about something beyond your level of understanding, something from an existence that is so grand that you weren't aware of yesterday.
Something from the beyond.
Exactly. That one day you wake up and you go outside and everything looks like it should be fine, but you just fucking know it isn't.
Too,
you know it isn't.
That, what you just said, is the core, I think one of the core positives of the 1956 version is everything is exactly the same.
Yes.
In the 1978, everything is not at all
the
same.
In the 50s version, there's this sense of real cosmic dread when hours, in the morning you have an interaction with a person who is screaming at you like, you got to believe me, my husband, he's different, it's not him, trust me. And then you see that person later in the day and they're like, I just want to say I'm so sorry for acting that way. Mm-hmm. I don't know what came over me.
Right.
And you're like, but you were convinced. And as the core characters become aware of what's going on, they start to lose allies.
Right.
And they only really discover that the hard way.
Yeah, your support system becomes smaller and smaller until it's non-existent.
Basically just a ranting and raving Kevin lunatic. McCarthy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Happy ending be damned. It really boils down to... Sure. It really boils down to, inevitability and this sort of sense of... That's the cosmic dread of it, is you can see your end coming. And all you can do, like a bug in a jar, is just freak out and go wild. You can't stop it. And is that worse? Is that worse than a quick ending?
Well, now that we've all lived through a pandemic too, I think it really makes a difference when you go back and watch these films, because this is just one town.
Yeah. And
one isolated small town in nowhere, California.
In this movie, it doesn't, they do kind of keep it contained to Santa Mira, which is this town that this takes place in. But
it's clear by all the pods as they start to.
Oh yeah. There are a lot of
them and move the seeds from place to place.
They start
it's
to
not going to be contained. They start
industrializing it
away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know I want to specify that my issues with this movie are not with Don Siegel, not with the story, and not with the actors. It's strictly with the limitations placed on Hollywood at the time. I think this is only a year or two after the Catholic Commission had officially disbanded, but there's still that very sort of more. There's a lot of censorship. There's a lot of like binary morality going on, and I think that limited the output of the time. So I just want to specify, I'm not creatively criticizing this film. I think it did the best it could in the time.
Yeah,
it was
it was a
released.
clear reflection of those times,
And it is legit a very good movie.
Absolutely.
Do you want to
take a? Let's take a break.
Okay. Another Saturday night, and here you are again, stuck alone at home watching your little Antichrist. You've tried every babysitter in town, and you would know, because you've had to bury most of them in the woods behind your house. But just because you had that one little fling with Satan in college, that doesn't mean you don't also deserve a night to yourself every once in a blood-red moon. Why not call Bad Seed Babysitting Service and let us mind your little monster for a night? Our team of demon wranglers and Munchausen mommies have a combined pool of experience that is literally older than most gods known to modern man. From demon spawn to sociopaths to future United States senators, there's no bad seed we're not equipped to handle. Every mommy's monster minder from Bad Seed comes fully certified and licensed by, well, no one really, but what other options do you have? All of our minders are bite-proof, immune to all poisons and caustic discharge, and warded against spells both demonic and divine. Give yourself a break. Call Bad Seed Babysitting Service, because even the mother of infernal prophecy needs some me time. This is a fake ad for a fake product on a horror-themed podcast. We do not condone nor endorse the wholesale slaughter of babysitters. Welcome back. I'm feeling much better now. I don't know what got me so excited.
What's happened to my husband?
Hello.
Oh, no.
Hello, wife.
Everyone.
I don't have opinions about anything, and nothing gets me riled up.
Actually, it sounds really nice.
Just a easy-going...
Wow, you're convincing me. I'm just going to go to sleep real quick. So let's jump into the 1978 version.
Let's. And ladies and gents, 1978, Philip Kaufman's Invasion of the Body Snatchers. As someone who has seen all 4 versions, this is my favorite one.
Let me give a brief overview. I mean, it's the same concept, essentially, but it takes place in San Francisco, and they wake up discovering that alien invaders are discreetly taking over unsuspecting minds and bodies while we sleep. Starring Donald Sutherland, Brooke Adams, Jeff Goldblum, Veronica Cartwright, and Leonard Nimoy.
What a cast.
And the screenplay is written by W.D. Riker and directed by Philip Kaufman.
Yeah, so Philip Kaufman, this is something that I realized now. Preparing for this pod, I watched this movie for the first time in a long time, and I had remembered really liking it a lot, and now I'm just over the moon in love with it. And Philip Kaufman was not a horror director. He is probably most well known for writing The Outlaw Josie Wales and directing The Right Stuff. And it got me thinking about the unique qualities of someone who is not a quote-unquote horror director directing a horror movie. And that's something I'd like to explore more in the future. But watching this film, there are so many elements of it that I think you might find in espionage thrillers or in other kinds of genre movies, but mashed together this way becomes so terrifying. And honestly, I'm surprised Philip Kaufman never made another horror movie, because this is the scariest version of the movie, in my opinion.
Well, the allegory metaphor definitely took place here for the societal challenges of the time and political challenges of the time, especially societal.
It's a completely different setting for one thing.
It's in color. It's got a really star-studded cast who actually, are given depth.
Yeah.
The way that the original didn't. And it's happening in the big city. And so, paranoia is now in the big city.
Yeah, and we're also taking place in a world that is post-Pentagon Papers, post-Watergate.
Yep.
we're in the energy crisis, the recession. So it's a very cynical time in America, post Vietnam. It's a time of mistrust and of a lot of anger, but also urban decay and grime plays a really big part in this.
Well, this, because it's the late 70s, then it really has to do with the psychology of the people, especially the people in San Francisco. This is like where baby boomers moved to be free.
Yeah.
And to like have, more of their, exploring other ways of living, not so much of a regimented, like if you look at 1956, it's pretty regimented. The female character lives with her parents because she's not married yet.
Yeah.
And so
in this
when
movie,
she gets married, then she'll move in with her then husband. This movie
Jeff
is like
Goldblum
free-loving.
Jeff Goldblum's a writer married to Veronica Cartwright, who runs a mud bath spa, and Leonard Nimoy is a pseudo psychologist.
Yeah, so
celebrity author.
Yeah. So it's basically these folks are it's almost a different culture that is being invaded and becoming pod people. So before it was more, these new pod people are the antithesis of the boomer culture.
Yes.
And so they steal they still steal the identities and infiltrate police and, then have this sort of dissension among what many people that lived in San Francisco in the late 70s wanted to adopt in their own culture, which is a little bit more of a free, non-authoritarian and anti-authoritarian.
Well, I'll tell you, watching this movie back to back with the 50s version, it's a stark contrast for sure, because in pretty much in many ways, honestly, but right from the get-go, the delivery system. So
I want to talk about that too.
The very opening of the movie, it kind of had this. It reminded me of Robert Wise's 1979 Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which obviously came out a year later, but this very 70s space vibe of its kind of the sound design is very eerie. This movie starts in space. You see this sort of misty, sentient stuff kind of floating through space, like space bubbles.
Can I tell you what Kaufman actually said?
Please.
He said it's a barren Martian-like planet, and the pod ectoplasm is escaping from it, looking for fresh hunting grounds, flying through space, and arriving in San Francisco.
Yeah, it enters the atmosphere, and it comes down through the rain.
We see all of this.
Yeah.
You did not see any of this.
No, you didn't see this in the 50s. You see all of this in the opening of the 70s movie, and it's really very well done.
It's interesting because he said it only cost $12 for this big vat of viscous material.
The chunky rain?
Yeah, the chunky rain.
Yeah, so this stuff comes down in the rain.
Because there was no digital capability.
It's chunky rain. It's just, chunky rain falling down, and it creates these special
gooey
flowers.
Pods. It was so gooey.
Yeah, the effects in this movie are phenomenal. So Brooke Adams, who really, honestly, if you look quickly, looks so much like Karen Allen. She and Karen Allen really, really. Anyway, this is fans of the Dead Zone will recognize her.
Yep.
She is wonderful in this movie. She finds this flower that she has never seen before, and she works with Donald Sutherland at the city health department.
She's a laboratory scientist
Yeah.
who is not only the female lead, but she is also, an example of women in the workforce.
Yes.
Women in the science-based workforce, which was a real big development.
Yes. Yeah. No offense to Dana Winter, but Brooke Adams is not walking through this movie in a house dress and white gloves the entire time.
No, she's nude in some of it.
That is true. So anyway, now right off the bat, whereas the 50s version has this kind of slow moving in the background until it's too late version, the 70s version kicks off kind of right away. Obviously, as the audience, we see the chunky rain, but aside from the chunky rain, shit kicks off right away. Like, people start acting weird right away.
Yeah, she gets
Brooke
the
Adams,
flower. It's her paramour that starts to...
Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he turns that
right
night.
Away.
So he starts acting weird right away. This manifests in, like, faces in the crowd staring at you. People, like the 50s version, there's people who are freaking out and then later that day being like, oh, everything's fine. Leonard Nimoy plays a psychologist who he gets turned pretty quickly, but before that happens, he's mentioning, like, yeah, you wouldn't believe it. Like, I've had 15 cases like this week.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that shift, sort of. Health concerns are definitely part of this film, more than the original. Donald Sutherland plays a health inspector who, oh my God, it's so disturbing. I find that part to be disturbing. His
character's fascinating in this movie because he plays someone who is patently unlikable.
Yes.
He's a very stern and serious-minded person, seemingly humorless. He's also kind of a dick, but ends up being this, like, existential hero to the point of, like, he has this naivete to him. Halfway through the movie, he's still calling the police department. And you're like, bro, they're everywhere.
Well, biological science has, from the 1956 time of life until the 70s, had extreme development.
Certainly, yeah.
Talking about, like, all of the vaccines, meningitis, pneumonia.
Polio.
Yep. So in that aspect, it's really a different focus altogether.
Yeah, and there's
it's not so much about people acting strange, it's about the biology of it too. There's a more focus on the biology of this change.
Well, not only do we see the arrival of the pods and how they come, but there's an incredible scene where you see what the body transfer really looks like. And that was something that bugged me from the first movie, was trying to figure out how this transfer takes place. The second version, the 78 version, shows you exactly how it takes place, and it is gnarly.
Well,
Holy shit.
That was very gooey. It's, you can definitely see this loss of humanity happening.
There is a scene starring Donald Sutherland surrounded by pods.
No, there's a scene starring Donald Sutherland and Donald Sutherland's pod mustache.
Yes.
It's the mustache in the pod for me that was, like, really bothersome.
It was, as a very dear friend of mine described it as Donald Sutherland's long virginal penis.
Well, what I liked about the first version was that it actually, like, grows into something.
Yeah.
This is like an exact replica down to the mustache.
And you can see them. You can see the humans as the pods start to, kind of like the picture of Dorian Gray, as the pods start to develop from this, like, blank slate. The humans start to dessicate. So you'll see, like, Jeff Goldblum, he's thirsty and his lips are crusty.
Yeah,
and they become tired and
lethargic.
It's like their life energy is being drained from them and transferred into the pod. So as the pod template starts to materialize more fully into the person is, like, deteriorating physically. So you really do get a sense of, like, oh, okay, this is how it happens. And when Donald Sutherland is awoken and smashes the pod people, there's blood and guts everywhere. Like,
well, it's
these
interesting
things aren't
because the
plants necessarily anymore. They've, like, evolved into almost perfect simulacrum of people.
It's not so much wasn't painful at all, because it looks painful for the things emerging from the pods. It's loud.
Looks like birth.
It looks like, it really does.
Yeah, it looks like birth.
Somewhat.
There are, like, membranes, and there's viscous, effluvia. There's a thrashing. There's a sense of pain of the pain of birth, of ripping into life. Yeah, it's quite visceral. And getting back to the sound design.
Oh, we didn't even get to it yet.
Well, prevalent throughout this film is the sound of an ultrasound heartbeat.
Yeah.
That sort of thump, thump, thump. And you hear that a lot around the pods and around pod people.
It's not just about that, though. It could also be, you know, how sometimes you can feel your heartbeat in your ears.
Yeah, exactly.
And
yeah,
you can
it's like a wet heartbeat.
It's a cross between, I feel like it's a mixture of an ultrasound whooshing sound and a heartbeat.
Yeah. But it's almost, in my mind, it sounded like a fetal heartbeat to me, because when these pod things are growing, they are like giant babies, because there's no fingerprints, there are no details.
But that's
and as they start to take shape, they harden and materialize.
Yeah.
But at first, they're like fetuses. They're sort of blank genetic slates,
but
waiting
that's
to be
not
imprinted.
all the audio has to do in this
No,
film.
the audio in this movie. By the way, it did win a Saturn Award for sound design and best director.
Ben Burt,
Yeah,
is the sound designer, and he's from Star Wars fame.
Oh, okay. I'm just gonna say, like, this guy at some point must have won an Academy Award, because this is incredible sound work in this movie.
Yeah. So he wanted to highlight the elements of nature and like within a bustling city.
Yeah, there's a lot of sounds of like snapping twigs and shit,
and children
crickets,
like
and
crying and laughing almost.
you hear a lot of whispers,
like crowd audience sound.
Yes,
like a
whispered
stadium,
conversations,
but also like a
yeah. There's like that sort of sound that you hear when something's about to kick off, about to happen, and it does have an effect. This movie's very tense.
It's industrial noise.
Interesting.
And he said it's punctuated by an ever-present sanitation trucks mashing what turns out to be the human body husks, which, you know, is that ultrasound sound.
Well, it's the first thing you see Jeffrey do in the beginning of the movie, is taking the garbage out on a non-garbage day.
Yep. Right.
And it turns out he's throwing out his old body.
Well, it starts out as the unassuming urban cacophony, and then it turns into sinister as the audience starts to recognize what's actually happening.
And there is an exploitation of the human desire to follow the rules.
Yeah.
Because these things are able to infiltrate pretty quickly, for the most part, because a lot of people don't ask questions or don't listen to each other, and they're just sort of going about their own little concerns, and by the time they look up from their desks, oh, everyone around me is a pod person and closing in on me. So it's like a disease. It's an insidious infiltration. And that's, I think, what makes it so scary is when it comes down to like just the last group of people left, they're fucked.
Well, Ben Burt created that pod shriek sound.
Oh, the shrieking noise.
Yep. Yeah. With like using a pig squeal and other like sound elements mixed together.
Wow.
Yeah.
I want to talk about a couple of things. Keep in mind, this movie came out before Alien, and yet those pods and the sounds they make looked a lot like the Alien pods.
Well, let's talk a little bit about when the
Alien
movie
pods
first came out. So the tagline for the movie was, "The seed is planted, terror grows.
Nice.
You'll never close your eyes again."
Oh.
And it came out in December of 1978. And that was 1 month after Jonestown.
Yikes.
So part of this pod thing, you know, becoming a single-minded group member.
Very much in the public consciousness.
You want to survive together as a group.
Yeah.
You know, Jonestown took place, and then a lot of people from San Francisco had been looking for like a better world and found themselves in like this poddom. And it couldn't have been more of like an appropriate movie to see at this point to sort of like snap you out of that desire.
Well, the other thing I wanted to mention about just how this movie kind of got ahead of a couple of things was you brought up the homeless man, dog, and banjo.
Oh, yeah. I definitely have some thoughts on that.
There is a scene towards the end of the movie where Donald Sutherland and Brooke Adams are still themselves, and they know what's going on.
And they're running through the tenderloin.
They're running through the town. They see the local homeless guy who was always around with his dog and playing his banjo, and he's got a pod next to him. They know what's going to happen, but there's no time to wake him up. Now, the next time we see them...
It's a mask of the banjo player.
No. It's the banjo player's human face on the dog's body making banjo noises.
Yeah, production made a mask of the banjo player.
What happened was these things... Oh, really? These things all being in proximity to each other and the pod merged together, much like The Thing or The Fly, which didn't come out until years later. Just saying, when I was watching this again, I just was thinking about all of the people that were influenced by it. The movie really was ahead of its time. The homeless guy dog banjo creation, it's like 3 seconds of the movie, and it is fucking horrifying.
Yeah, so production put together, made a mask. So we missed this one in our mask episode,
I guess.
So they made a mask of the banjo player's face and put it on a dog, and they put something on the lips of the mask so that the dog would keep sticking its tongue out and licking it, so it looked like the human tongue.
Yeah, it was really, really scary.
And the banjo music that was recorded for the film was performed by Jerry Garcia. Wow. Talk about the 1970s San Francisco, you know?
Oh, shit, right? Sitting in the Tenderloin, just doing the soundtrack for the banjo dog monster.
Yep.
So, you know, there's this wonderful scene where they're going to give a sedative to Donald Sutherland and Brooke Adams, and they're saying, you know, what's going to happen to us? And Leonard Nimoy, at this point, Pod Nimoy, says, you will be born again into an untroubled world.
Yeah, like, why wouldn't you want to believe Leonard Nimoy?
Sounds amazing,
moment?
Right? Sounds amazing.
Well,
but you're not human. You won't be born into shit. You're going to die. Your consciousness will go on to a plant person who will continue to act like you, but you will be dead.
Well, it's really the psychology that was more heavily focused, like Jeff Goldblum's character, that, you know, quirky poet, outsider.
He's kind of conspiracy minded,
but completely human.
Yep.
Like he's, you know, and then Leonard Nimoy is like a pop psychologist. And he, you know, when he transforms, is it even much of a transformation?
Listen, I want to give a shout out to Veronica Cartwright, who had a really tough couple of years. So 1978, you know, she's in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and boy, she makes it all the way to the end, only to be betrayed in one of the all-time greatest downbeat endings of any horror movie.
Well,
and then just a year later,
right now?
just a year later, she plays Lambert in Alien, and we all know how that worked out. Poor Veronica Cartwright.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to the end. I don't want to talk about that yet.
Okay.
Because I want to talk about a couple more differences. I know that the director intentionally wanted a film noir feeling. So with the colors that they created, there hadn't been a lot of examples of this type of film in the past. So he really thought about like what kind of, you know, pod characteristics would each character have. He added purple and shot from different angles to create, you know, shadows and like long, dark passageways, you know, roadways.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some really good like chase scenes that are shot in low angle, crowd scenes. There are some classic elements of, I think what makes this so successful is a lot of the tension of this film is the same as like a thriller. And a lot of this film is shot like a kind of off-kilter thriller, which, you know, ramps up the tension. Essentially, it's people slowly losing allies and being backed into a corner. Now, they fight back in a spectacular fashion. But, you know, the one of the chief differences and a real sign of the times in this movie is in the 50s version, you always have a sense that, like, no, we can do this. We can win. We can do this. We just have to stick together. We got to be smart. In the 70s version, they're fucked. And you get that sense basically from the start, despite the fact that Donald Sutherland plays this kind of existentialist hero character who's like constantly being optimistic and saying, no, we're going to win, we're going to fight back. But the chief difference is whenever he said it, I was like, no, you're not. Dude, you're being an idiot. You are absolutely not going to win. You've already lost.
I do like how the 1978 version, though, pays a lot of homage to the 1956 version.
Do you want to get into that?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So one of the things is...
one of the best Easter eggs ever.
Well, I wasn't going to talk about that one.
Oh,
yeah.
Then...
I was going to talk about a different part.
Yep.
So the main male character of both films hide under floorboards with the townspeople running over on top of the floorboards.
Yeah, very...
seemingly like it is both in an abandoned rail train area for both films, which is really creepy because, you know, you almost think they can see down below. And it's really, I think, that from the perspective of the person underneath the floorboards, which both films did, I thought that was really effective.
Yeah, I mean, both films have that element of neighbors reporting on each other. So there is that sort of Nazi iconography there of like hiding under the floorboards from the Gestapo or from the secret police or the KGB or, you know, any authoritarian type of monstrous government. But the overwhelming sense in the 70s version that, oh no, right from the start, no, none of you have a chance in hell of getting through any of this. This was over before you were even aware it started.
Well, were you going to talk about the
so different
Kevin McCarthy piece?
You want to talk about that? Well, there are a couple of Easter eggs in this. So one of the more spectacular ones is a scene where things are starting to kick off. Donald Sutherland and Brooke Adams get into a cab, and they are starting to become aware, but they're not fully aware of the extent of everything.
A cab driven by...
Well, no, actually, that's later.
Okay.
That's a later scene, but I know what you're talking about. That's a later scene.
Okay.
So this is just a regular cab. They get in, they're on their way, and lo and behold, a haggard Kevin McCarthy.
Hysterical alarmist.
Hysterical, screaming in the streets, banging on car windows, dressed in a gray suit, just like the original, yelling about pod people, and they look just like you. They're here. They're here. Which is exactly he said in the 50s version was he was screaming, they're here. They're already here. So think about
it. Now listen to me.
I know. Okay.
This is the through line.
Yes.
Kevin McCarthy has been going from town to town, raising the alarm bells because he is, 30 years older in this film.
They show him in this movie as a man who has aged as he would have.
So he is running from town to town throughout the entire state of California, trying to get people to listen to him. Still, after all these years, no one is listening to him.
I agree with you, but that's a retcon because that happened in the 70s. Watching the film from the point of view of this is the only film that exists because the only one that's been shot, I think the ending of the original movie was tacked on by the studio because movies needed to have a happy ending. I love the 70s downbeat retconning of actually it didn't work out in the 50s version, and this guy has spent the last few decades running around screaming, and he meets an unfortunate end.
But isn't that the craze? Like, say if you watch the original version, right, in the late 50s or 60s, and you've gone your whole life thinking that movie had a happy ending, and then to see Kevin McCarthy show up, and then you're almost like, what? Also, what is more 1970s than, spitting on the 50s?
But, there's the other Easter egg that you were referring to is later in the movie, towards the end, when Brooke Adams and Donald Sutherland get into another cab and asked to be taken to the airport, the driver of that cab, who drives them into a trap, is Don Siegel.
Yeah, the director of the first
of the first movie, and he's got a whole bunch of lines and everything, and he's great. He looks like a cabbie. He's got the mustache.
Do you have any other Easter eggs? Because I have one more.
Go for it. Pod eggs?
In the very beginning
Easter pods
of the film, there is a it's sort of like a something's not right here. What is it? There's a priest swinging on a children's swing set.
Yes. Yeah, and he's looking.
And that priest is Robert Duvall.
Yes, it is.
Yep. He did a cameo in that film.
Yeah, it's really something when you're watching the movie.
It's weird because you're like, that is weird.
You're like, is that... Wait, And, you can go back and watch it, but I imagine watching it in a theater, not being able to rewind it right away, being like, hold on a second.
Or even the juxtaposition of a priest swinging on a children's swing set.
The imagery itself is strange.
Or then it starts to add these other implications too, because of priests being around children. For me, anyway.
Absolutely, you can make of it what you will, but the real. I know that I've been pretty open in expressing my preference for the 70s version. In my opinion, it's so masterfully crafted. The sound design, the direction, the vibe of the movie is so perfect. The special effects are really, really great. It is genuinely scary throughout.
With the 50s is very much like a fever dream. The film watches like a fever dream.
It's kind of psychedelic.
Yep.
Yeah, it's
definitely.
A little groovy.
But I have to still go with 1956, that whole desperation of not being believed, and everyone around you is dwindling, and then there's less and less people to convince, and you have pretty much nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. In this film, it's less so of that desperation. There's less of that desperation. It's more of, we need to survive. We need to not become pod people and survive. It's not so much of, I need to get these people to understand the truth.
I agree. And one thing that we didn't talk really about that is prevalent throughout the 70s version is that it's a uniquely urban experience of being lonely or isolated when you are surrounded by people.
Right.
Anyone who's lived in a big population center at some point in their life has probably experienced that very strange juxtaposition of, there are people all over the place. There's tons of stuff to do. There are a million choices of things, and I am lonely, and I don't know anybody here. I'm new to the town, or I don't have any friends yet.
Well, that's
that sense of urban loneliness is really played in this movie to great effect.
Well, that's why that love story between Brooke Adams and Donald Sutherland's characters made sense to me, is because it's we're desperate to save humanity here. Yeah.
Well, also they have a history, they have a past that's heavily alluded to, and
But you can't go to sleep, and all these people are gonna you're basically gonna become a monster soon. It's sort of who has the time for that, but it's more about saving their own humanity, or understanding that this might go away for them.
My favorite character in this movie was Veronica Cartwright's character. Well, she was so tough. She put up with so much shit from people with a smile on her face, just she had an inner strength. She rushed out after Jeff, her husband.
Yep.
With no thought to her own safety.
She was the one that saved Donald Sutherland.
She saves Donald Sutherland from being assimilated.
Mm-hmm.
She is the final girl. She is just.
She's not, though.
Well, she's the one who makes it longer than anybody else.
There's no final girl.
I just want to give a shout out to her character, from dealing with disgusting customers in her mud bath business, hitting on her and being gross, to surviving the apocalypse longer than anybody else did. She was awesome.
Well, that's why the ending is so shocking, is because they both, Donald Sutherland and Veronica Cartwright's characters, have made it so far, gone through so much, and the way that Donald Cartwright is sort of walking around but nobody's after him is your first clue that something's off.
They've done this now in both versions of the movies. They do this, which has now become kind of a trope, where the people who are still human hide in plain sight by walking without displaying any emotion.
And he showed you how he did that earlier.
When
he got out from the desk. Yeah. And went in line with everybody.
In the 70s version, it's Veronica Cartwright who says, no, this is how you do it. I've been walking around all day.
Yep.
You just don't react to things.
Right.
And it's unfortunately very hard not to react to a banjo human dog monster that runs at you. So nothing against Brooke Adams. I would have screamed too.
And so, the end, Donald Sutherland's walking around seemingly still very aware, but when Veronica Cartwright cross paths with him, she's like, oh, thank goodness. Like, she's so grateful.
Oh, the relief.
And then he just basically, I mean, you have to all watch it, but it's that shriek, the pointing, the mouth open.
Yeah. It's very inhuman.
And that's how the movie ends.
It's a sound the human...
like shaking her head in fear.
Yeah. She completely loses it.
They're all coming to get her. So
it's over.
It's over for her.
She has gone through hell to make it where she is, and the movie ends with us watching none of that matter.
Right.
It is a real bleak ending.
Very
but
bleak.
The thing is that is the vibe of the movie. The movie,
which, I think that is what, that dread. You know how you love dread?
I do. We talked about that, the different kinds of horror, dread being one of them, and that is always my favorite kind of movie, is one that instills a deep sense of dread.
And not being believed is one of my trigger points. So that's why I feel more scared by the 1956 one, and the 1978 one is more disturbing, more disruptive.
I understand that. And again,
not as scary to me.
They are both superlative movies. They're both very, very good. The 78 version is my favorite. The 56 version is your favorite. The 1993 version by Abel Ferrara is also really good and has its own thing to say. It's a lot more about the military and whatnot. It's got its own message. It's a great story because it can be successfully adapted to fit the fears of the time. The 50s version stands well on its own from the 70s version because while plot points are similar, they are thematically exploring their own ideas.
Well, that's what I said at the beginning, is that the plot is adaptable, which is why this movie can continue to be remade.
And I think, we are always afraid of losing our sense of self, of losing friendships, losing relationships, losing, just institutions
people
that we've always believed
without
in.
explanation, or us
these are
not being able to connect with those people
These are real
anymore.
things that happen to us. And, some of the best horror, Stephen King certainly knows this, is when you take the mundane and the everyday and you just flip the coin and show the dark side of it. So that's our
take on the remake Invasions of the Body Snatchers.
Once again, two solid entries, and I maintain that there's nothing wrong with remaking something for a new generation. Just don't carbon copy it. Just do something new.
Or
tell
should
a
you
new
carbon
story.
Copy it?
Oh, pod
should
copies.
You be an exact duplicate?
Uh-oh. Laura?
Exact duplicate.
Laura, you're so thirsty.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Terror in Tandem is written, produced, and recorded by Laura and Richard Mathiasen, and edited and mixed by Richard Mathiasen. Our theme was written and performed by Carrie Denver, and all other music was written and performed by David Sispanik. All opinions expressed on this podcast are our own and should be taken as such. Thanks for listening, and please remember to give us a like, a review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. We're standing right behind you.